Wait, what about weird?
Hi, I'm Echo.
And I'm Elena.
And this is our podcast, What About Weird? A podcast discussing all things weird, from cryptids and aliens to strange science and unhinged history. Where the fuck is my document? God damn it.
Today we're talking about my topic.
So when you think about ancient Greek mythology and lore, what do you tend to think about?
The Iliad and the Odyssey and Zeus being horny.
Yeah, pretty much. So when we typically think of ancient Greek mythology and lore, we think of the pantheon of gods and heroes such as like Heracles and Odysseus, or of mythical creatures such as the Minotaur or Medusa. But there's a creature from ancient Greek lore that is often overlooked or entirely forgotten, and it's called the Vrykolakas.
The Vrykoli?
The
Vrykola.
The Vrykolakas. It's spelled Vrykolakas.
And I thought English was hard.
It was a little difficult. I had to look up how to actually pronounce it, because when you look up like how to pronounce things on Google, there's like this stupid AI thing that comes up.
You have to like find an expert in ancient Greek.
Yeah, and the AI voice will go, Vrykolakas, and that's...
Vrykolakas!
I'm like, that's not it.
There was something I was looking up where I found like 4 different ways to pronounce something. It was like, you pronounce it this way, or you pronounce it that way, or you can pronounce, like, every website said something different. I'm like, I'm just never gonna say this word.
All right, so though it is unknown the exact dates, it is thought that the Vrykolakas was one of the original forms of a vampire, coming into existence around the time that the Slavic vampire showed up in folklore. The word Vrykolakas is
the word Vrykola.
It's derived from the Bulgarian word Vrykolakas, which consists of the word wolf and hare, which originally meant werewolf. It still has this meaning in a lot of modern Slavic regions, but in early Bulgaria and in ancient Greece, this term or a similar one was used for vampire-like creatures, alongside the term vampire, which was used in the neighboring regions. Thus, the two concepts became somewhat mixed. The Vrykolakas have many of the same characteristics as vampires in the Balkan folklore. They do not decay. Instead, their bodies swell up as if freshly engorged with blood. Though, unlike other forms of vampire, the Vrykolakas do not drink the blood of their victims. They
drink the plasma. They're hipsters.
So, the Vrykolakas, instead of drinking the blood of its victims, it cannibalizes them instead, and specifically consumes the liver in most instances. So it was thought that around this time period that people who had red hair and gray eyes were the Vrykolakas, which sucks for you if you're born like that, I guess. And then the activity of the Vrykolakas ranges from leaving their graves to roam around at night to causing an epidemic within the village. So if there were diseases...
Sounds like politicians.
Honestly.
Leaving their grave, causing epidemics, wreaking havoc, possibly undead. It's just politicians.
See, they're still out there. They're roaming around today. It was actually also believed that the Vrykolakas would knock on the doors of houses in the village and call out the name of the resident. And if they don't get a reply the first time, the Vrykolakas will move on. But if the victim opens the door, then they will die within 24 hours and become a Vrykolakas themselves.
Is this sort of the origin of vampires have to be invited in?
That's almost what I was thinking, because it sounds very similar to that.
So there's this whole thing in a lot of folklore and pagan traditions and like superstitions of the threshold. Of the threshold protects you. Like, vampires can't be let in. There's the whole thing of, vampires can't be let in over the threshold. Certain creatures can't be let in through the threshold or can't go out through, like, the door. The door, right. It's like your space, your energy and stuff. Like, some of the things, it's not with vampires, but to go with the whole threshold thing, like carrying the bride over the threshold is taking her into your life and your space. So that symbolism. There's like a thing with, you know, protecting it. People put salt over their doorways, or will put things on the sides of their doors or their windows and stuff like that.
Right.
There's a thing I've heard with some southern folklore and superstitions of painting your doorways and windows blue to keep out the boo hag. There's also like painting the ceiling blue of your porch, but that's a different thing. But like the threshold thing, that like this is a point of you are now in my space. Your house is your house, your rules type thing.
Right.
You know, you are letting them into your sort of kingdom, as it were, like every man's house is kingdom type mentality. So I wonder if it has something to do with that, of, you know, thresholds, and you have to open it up to somebody.
Right, because it didn't say specifically in any of the research that I was doing that this was like the origin of, you know, you had to invite the vampire in. But considering the fact that the Vrykolakas was one of the first instances that we know of vampire-like creatures in just kind of folklore, it probably either came from like the Slavic version of the vampire that then introduced it to the Greece side of things, or maybe this is like the origin of that. But it created like this superstition in Greek villages that one should not answer the door until the second knock. And then folklore also...
And this is why the dad knock was invented, because you have to do the... and wait for the... before you can be let in.
Folklore also suggests that the Vrykolakas crushes or suffocates a sleeping victim by sitting on their chest, similar to a mare, which is the origin of nightmare.
That's like what I was mentioning earlier with the boo hag of it's, and like the whole old hag, night hag thing. It's like sucks out your energy by sitting on your chest. And I've heard a lot of theories of this is a sleep paralysis thing. Same with other vampire stories and stuff.
Right, and so I think a
that's
lot of
interesting.
these are coming from these ancient cultures, and once people start to travel around a bit, they're like incorporating different pieces of each different culture, of each different bit of folklore into like new creatures, which is why I think there are so many similarities despite them being considered like a completely different creature in a completely different region. But this is also similar to an incubus, which is another one of like the original sleep paralysis demons that was sit on your chest.
Isn't that also Greek mythology type?
I'm
or
not
is that
entirely sure
I know there's a
where an incubus
thing
comes
in-
from.
I thought it was a Greek thing as well.
I'm actually not sure. That'll be something I'll have to look into in the future.
I don't know.
But I do know the vampires in the Bulgarian culture were also known to do this. So whatever vampires that they had in their culture were also known to like sit on someone's chest and either crush them or suffocate
We should
them.
do an episode at some point about sleep paralysis, because there's so many superstitions around it, and it connects so much to these things. And people are like, oh, what if this thing is just sleep paralysis? Or, you know, this was people's way of explaining sleep paralysis and this, that, and the other.
Yeah, absolutely. Because there are, I mean, probably at least a dozen like creatures from different folklore and different cultures that do this similar thing that we could now just equate to being like a sleep paralysis demon. So the Vrykolakas becomes more powerful over time, so one should destroy the body as soon as possible. According to a few accounts, this can only be done on a Saturday, since this is the day that the Vrykolakas rests in its grave. A person can become a Vrykolakas after death if they led a sacrilegious life, were excommunicated, buried in unconsecrated ground, or if they consumed the meat of a sheep that was harmed by a wolf or a werewolf. That one's a really interesting one.
If it's harmed by a dog, you're fine?
I guess, yeah, if it's a normal dog, but if it's a wolf or a werewolf that harmed the sheep and then you eat that sheep, you will become a Vrykolakas.
Interesting.
Yeah. And since the ancient Greeks...
Didn't you say that the word came from like a Bulgarian word for similar to wolf? I wonder if that's why.
Yeah,
if it was
'cause
like
it was-
the wolf, it's connected to wolfishness.
Well, there are some accounts that say that a werewolf can even become a Vrykolakas. I don't know exactly how that happens.
Changing
but
career paths?
It's like they kind of maintain their same kind of hairy werewolfy form, but they'll behave more like a Vrykolakas and decide to like gorge on people's livers and such. So that's interesting. So they are kind of related in certain ways, I guess, because the original word was meant to be for werewolves, but then it kind of like developed into this word that they now use for like vampire-like creatures.
I feel like that was the wolf sheep eating thing was like a remnant of that, but I don't know.
Yeah. Since the ancient Greeks believed that the dead could reanimate and exist between life and death, which is the state of being undead, burials of people considered to be Vrykolakas have been discovered in really interesting states. An early example of this may date all the way back to Neolithic Cyprus, which is 4500 to 3800 BC, where bodies were found buried in pit graves and pinned by millstones, which were placed on their heads and chests to keep their bodies from leaving the grave.
I've heard of that. Yeah, I heard about that. There's some other podcast I was listening to where they were talking about finding evidence of, like, old vampires and finding that and, like, graves with the stake through and stuff and, like, putting heavy stones to keep people from rising up from the graves and stuff. I didn't know that was in Greece.
Yeah, a lot of these are in Greece. So in the ancient city of Camarina, which is now located on the southern coast of Sicily, there are 2 burials that were found that may be linked to the Vrykolakas. The first was the body of an adult completely covered in amphora fragments. An amphora is a type of container, almost like pottery, like a jar, and it's typically made from ceramic.
So, coffin jar? Person jar?
Not like big enough to like hold people. Yeah, I mean they could be like any various,
but
like,
it's
size,
not
because basically just like a jar.
Okay, it's not for. It wasn't to store a person. It was just on top of this person.
Yeah, so they.
Okay, I thought it was like a ceramic casket or something.
No, they found the amphora was in fragments, so it's like a bunch of fragments of this stuff that were laid on top of this person, like basically like really heavy fragments of it piled up on top of this body, and they think it may have been meant to weigh the body down so it couldn't leave its grave.
Or this person went to a sleepover and their friend didn't have a blanket.
Or they, like, legitimately just made amphora and an entire, like, case of it collapsed on them or something.
Or maybe they made amphora and they put it on them as tribute, because I've heard things like that with ancient burials.
Yeah, that's so true.
You're a sheep herder, they bury you with wool. Mm-hmm. You know.
The second burial that they found in this area was that of a child that they believe is anywhere from the age 8 to 13 that was weighed down by 5 large stones. And in Attica, which is the region that contains Athens, a lime kiln was found that served as a gravesite for 2 bodies which had been dismembered and then sealed into the kiln using heavy rocks. And then on the Greek island of Lesbos, there was an isolated tomb that was found containing the body of an adult who was pinned down at the neck, pelvis, and feet with 20-centimeter long nails. And another body located in this area was that of an elderly man with 3 bent 16-centimeter long nails mixed in with his bones that they think also were pinning him down in his grave.
Do we know what these were made of?
Like the nails?
Yeah. Because I know there's a whole thing with, like, silver and the undead and also iron and the fae. Or, like, iron and, like, the other side. Like, you put iron nails in the corner of your house to protect him, or iron can protect you from the fae, or silver bullets for werewolves, or silver daggers for werewolves. So I'm just curious if you found anything.
It didn't specifically say what kind of metal it was made out of.
A metallic metal.
But I bet that if we did like a Google
probably
search, it
iron.
would tell you what kind of metals they had.
Probably iron.
I would think iron.
I wonder if it had anything to do with the, like, spiritual properties of that, or if it's just like we had them and we didn't want them getting back up.
Yeah, if it was intentional what kind of metal they used, or if it was just we just need to pin them down with something. Yeah, I'm not sure. But it does seem like there's evidence suggests that the people of ancient Greece were wary of those that have been buried and took specific measures to keep them in their graves. Though most people don't know of the Vrykolakas today, ever since the modern day idea of a vampire swept across the world, there are still villages within Greece where people believe in the Vrykolakas. In Greece, during World War II, during the Great Famine in 1941 and 1942, 300,000 Greeks starved to death. Graveyards were so overfilled, families had to resort to burying their loved ones in mass grave sites outside of the cemeteries. Since this was unconsecrated ground, some believed that those who were buried there would come back to haunt them as Vrykolakas. Some families even took preemptive measures to make sure their loved one didn't become a Vrykolakas by beheading the corpse before they put them in the grave.
It's always interesting to me what, things survive through, like what superstitions survive through time. Because there's so many stuff that you look back with, like a long, long time ago, and you're like, oh, this is because of this superstition. That's where this comes from. But like, all things considered, you said World War I?
World War II.
Two?
Yeah.
That's really...
That's not even 100 years ago. It's in the 1940s.
Yeah, there's people that are still alive from then, That seems, by modern normal standards, to put it that way, that seems too recent to be believing in vampires.
Yeah.
And I always find that stuff, like, fascinating. And it's interesting that, little things like that survive.
Right, because it's almost as if Vrykolakas is a little different from a vampire in the way that it's more spiritual in a sense, especially since a person becomes a Vrykolakas
by doing unholy things.
Right.
Instead of, well, you were bitten, now you're infected like a disease. Which I've heard interesting theories that certain diseases inspired the idea of vampires and stuff. Which would go along with the bitten and the contagion. Vampirism is a contagion, but that is interesting. There's like a spiritual thing of do this and do that, and kind of like a cautionary tale of bury your dead properly, or they're gonna come and get you at night.
Right, they're gonna come back and haunt you.
Yeah.
It's like this thing that's going to come eat out your liver.
Yeah.
So in ancient Greece, they would use what was called apotropaic magic. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but that's what it looks like to me, which is considered a certain protective magic. This could be an object or a practice meant to prevent the individual from becoming a Vrykolakas, or something that would distract the Vrykolakas so it wouldn't harm the living. One ancient Greek practice included placing an obelisk coin in the mouth of the corpse to pay the toll across the river Styx in the underworld, ensuring the person passed over to the other side.
Is that where we get the pennies on the eyes thing? It's 2 pennies to cross the river of the dead?
It's probably related.
It's probably a similar thing.
Yeah,
it's a toll bridge.
Yeah, it's...
Because you can't escape microtransactions even in death.
But yeah, they would put this coin in the mouth of the dead person to appease, like the boatman that takes him across the river Styx into the underworld. It's basically to pay their way across the river.
To be like, well, I came back as a vampire because I was too broke. Sorry, now I'm haunting you.
It's also argued that the coin could have been used to ward off evil spirits from entering the body.
And a lot of those were probably silver. The coins were silver, probably. Maybe bronze. Not necessarily. I don't know. I don't know what ancient Greek money was, but...
Yeah, I'm not too sure about that either.
Because like I was mentioning earlier with the silver to ward off evil type thing.
Yeah, a lot of these could just come from that, knowing what kind of coins they use.
You're going to talk about it in a second, but you mentioned doing things to occupy the Vrykolakas. There's a lot of things I've heard from different mythologies of, like, with certain forms of werewolf, you put like 13 stones or 13 nuts or something on your porch to occupy it because they can only count to like 12 and then they lose count at 13
and they
have to start over. Or like you put a broomstick at your door because this spirit will have to count all of the twigs on the broomstick and won't be able to get through your door because they're busy doing that. Is it like things like that?
It's exactly the same.
Like they have to count, or like you put there's something, I don't remember what this was, but you put like a tangle of string and the thing has to untangle the string. They're like occupied with that. And honestly, as someone with OCD, I relate. I 100% relate, because there's so many things where I'm like, I have to know exactly how many of these things are, or I have to straighten this up. I have to put this has to be here. I have to complete this task, or else I will die. I won't die, but I will die.
Yeah.
But
there are
I'm assuming you're going to get into that.
In like tons of different cultures, and for so many different creatures, the counting thing seems to be everywhere, which is...
It seems a lot of things, it's like over the number 13.
Yeah. So a modern practice in the... to kind of keep the Vrykolakas at bay, included a wax cross with the inscription, Jesus Christ Conquers, that they would place on the corpse to prevent the individual from coming back as a vampire. So this is, of course, like, look closer to the modern times.
Why does it have
when
to be
Christianity
wax?
took over. I'm not entirely
Maybe that was just
sure.
easiest to get a hold of and mold?
Yeah, to put the inscription on, but you would think that they could have easily done it in wood as well. And I know that a lot of cultures have the association of, like, wood, like a wooden stake.
Maybe that's where it was a wooden stake. It was the wax stake that transformed into a wooden stake, but then or the wax cross that transformed into a wood cross, and then you can turn a cross into a stake with handles.
Yeah, because I know that like a cross is used to ward off so many different things, especially vampires in different cultures.
Even outside of like Christianity, the cross symbol, like an X or like two things intersecting, is a huge like magical thing. Like crossroads, you know, you can get a cross to like as like a like barring it, you know, in some things it's literally just barring the way. If you were to put two cross, you know, pieces of string or piece of wood across the door, even if that's not a religious thing, it's like, oh, I'm not going to go in there, I can't go in there.
Right.
But I know there is a lot of religious connotation with that. But that is interesting that it's wax specifically.
Yeah, it didn't say specifically why they chose wax. Unfortunately, there's like not too much information that I could find on these unless I wanted to read like an entire book that has a chapter on them or something.
Yeah, I get that. I know how that goes. You're like, I really want to know this one thing, I'm curious about it. And it's like, how about you read 23 academic papers that you have to get through a paywall for? And you're like, no, thank you.
I'm okay.
I'm going to guess wildly. I have that ability.
So this is along the lines of what you mentioned. So other methods from Europe to keep vampires at bay included severing the tendons of the body at the knees so that if they came back as a vampire or a Vrykolakas, they wouldn't be able to walk, or placing poppy seeds or sand near the grave so that the vampire would be compelled to count them all. And there are some that say they just sit there counting them all, or some that say they can only count at a rate of 1 per year. So it literally just keeps them there forever counting.
They're like, 1. Okay, good night.
They sit there for
2.
365 days.
Good night.
And then this is similar to a practice that exists in, I don't know if it still exists, but it existed in China and in India, where a sack of rice was placed near the body so that if the undead arose, they would need to count every grain of rice they found within the sack.
Yeah, I've heard things like that, and like I was saying with the stones and stuff. I've heard salt, I've heard rice, you know, grains, whatever.
Yeah, any sort of thing that would take a while to count.
All I'm learning is that from all these things, when you die, you get OCD if you didn't already have it.
You come back and you're just like, shit, I have to count all of these grains of rice.
And I don't know where to stop cutting the broccoli. You just leave a thing of broccoli by the grave. They have to cut it, but because broccoli keeps going, they don't know where to stop. You end up with broccoli rice.
So the first Western accounts of the Vrykolakas come from the compositions of authors in mid-17th century, such as the Greek librarian of the Vatican, Leo Alladius. I think that's how you pronounce his name.
Good old Leo boy. Leo. That man over there with the library books.
But he stated in 1645, the Vrykolakas is an evil and wicked person who may have been excommunicated by a bishop. Its body swells up so that all its limbs are distended. It is hard, and when it tapped, it thrums like a drum. For this reason, it is called tympaniosis, drum-like.
I'm picturing, what's her name? who's it, Veruca Salt or someone from that swells up
when
like a
she swells
blueberry,
up.
but it's just a vampire.
His
I'm picturing
legs
that.
look like barrels.
Yeah, I'm just picturing that. Also, when did this all started within Christianity, or like after Christianity took over, or was this like some bleed over from like pre-Christian like Hellenistic practices? Because you're talking a lot about like you're excommunicated by a bishop, it was unconsecrated ground, you're buried with a cross. I'm just curious if this was like...
So a lot of this started to rise in like 16th century, alongside when the Slavic stuff was coming along. So we're starting to see like the emergence of Christianity
like
in these
having a
cultures.
timeline.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes more sense. Mm-hmm. Okay. What were you saying about excommunication?
So he continues, the devil animates such bodies and causes them to roam about at any time of day or night. On Chios, residents will not answer until the caller has called their name twice, because the Vrykolakas is believed to only be able to call once. And if it is answered, its victim will die within 24 hours. If seen during the day, the Vrykolakas is so horrible that witnesses die of fright.
But if you see them at night, they're not. They're really hideous, but you're not going to die of fright. You're just like, ugh. Well, anyways.
They don't have street lights, so they just see some random shadow dude, and they're like, all right, some drunk walking home.
I guess, unless they're fully lit by moonlight, maybe?
Yeah.
Then you're like, ugh. But not quite terrifying.
The witness will die of fright unless they speak to the monster, which will immediately disappear.
So if you look at it and you die of fright, how do you talk to them? Or would you have to like see the shadow and be like, "Hey, you over there," and then they disappear before you get a full glimpse of them?
I think it's like kind of whether or not you're like a courageous person or not. So if you look at it and you just sit there and you're like stunned, you're just gonna, I don't know, have a heart attack and die right there. Mm-hmm. But if you see it and you're like, "Hey, what the fuck are you?" then it just disappears.
Okay, so if you have a fight or flight response and your response is or like fight, flight, or freeze, and your response is flight or freeze, you die. If you fight it or call it slurs, you're fine.
Yeah. If you're like, "Wow, you look like shit, sir," then it'll just disappear.
Like, "That's not very nice," and then disappears in a puff of smoke.
Fine, I'll just go away.
You know what? Your mom didn't say that last night. It just disappears in a puff of smoke.
All right, and then there was Father Francois Richard in 1657 also described accounts of the Vrykolakas, telling the story of a gentle Vrykolakas Alexander in the village of Pyrgos, who had been a shoemaker. He returned from the grave to mend his children's shoes, carry water for the family, and chop their firewood.
Honestly, respectful.
I know, it's
He's
so
like,
cute.
"I'm here to take care of my family." Let me guess. They're like, "What if we put 30 milling stones on you and killed you even though you're trying to help your family from the grave?"
Exactly. His neighbors were finally frightened enough to exhume and cremate his body.
"He's doing an honest day's labor! Kill him!"
After which his visit ceased. And then Richard also states that there were accounts of many Vrykolakas in Amargos, an island of Greece. Amargos? I don't know. Where people stated they walked the fields during the day. And then in 1701, a French traveler supposedly witnessed the slaying of a Vrykolakas at Mykonos and later wrote down his experience in 1718. So these accounts are now spanning from 1645 is when there's this Greek librarian that's writing them down. And then we see like this French traveler.
With the books.
Yeah, then we see like this French traveler all the way in 1701 that's still witnessing like people getting slain as Vrykolakas. And then in 1930, there's a woman named Dorothy. Her name is
Dorothy
so
from
difficult.
Greece.
Her name is so difficult, and I'm really gonna try not to fuck it up. Dimitra Kupoulou?
That sounds right.
Yeah.
But also, I'm not Greek.
Dorothy, I don't know if she's Greek or not, but so it's Dorothy Dimitra Kupoulou Lee, interviewed
Dorothy D.
Dorothy D. She interviewed native Greek individuals who had immigrated to the U.S. and asked for the Vrykolakas stories. Many described the lore in their villages and the stories their parents told them as kids. One account stated, they say that once a Vrykolakas married, and he begot 2 children. But every Saturday...
Oh no, here we go again with the begoting.
But every Saturday, his wife would miss him. Well, one occasion she said, my husband disappears every Saturday. I don't know where he goes. There was a party, and he went to the party, and he was singing. All those who were there listening said, that man's voice resembles the voice of so-and-so. So all of them there said, this man has died. How can it be this man? So they asked the woman, where did you get to know him? So she said, he is a shoemaker. He came and we arranged to get married.
Wait, is it the same shoemaker from earlier?
It's not, but there are 3 different written accounts of shoemakers becoming Vrykolakas.
So what I'm hearing is don't be a shoemaker in Greece.
I guess not. Maybe the Pope just really doesn't like shoemakers, and so he like excommunicates all of them, and then they're screwed.
The Pope got shoes made by someone that made 2 left shoes, or he made one shoe slightly smaller than the other, and he's like, blessed are the peacemakers, but not the shoemakers.
So he said he's a shoemaker. He came, and we arranged to get married, but every Saturday he disappears. So the villagers make plans because they are told the Vrykolakas do not come out on Saturday. So they went. They set out with fire and torches. They went up to the grave. They opened it, and they found him inside. He begged for mercy that they do not burn him. As a sign, he showed them how one side of his body was empty. But they showed him no mercy. They burned him. And that was the end of the Vrykolakas.
So Greece just hates working men, specifically shoemakers. He's like, he's there for his family. He's going to parties. He's singing. And everyone's like, your singing voice is too good and you sound too much like this other person. We don't like that you're taking care of your family and singing. The other one, the guy was like, I want to care for my family, so I'm going to come back. So we're going to kill you. And the third guy was just like, I'm a shoemaker. And they're like, fuck you. Get the millstones. It wasn't even undead. They were just like, he's a shoemaker.
But it's really interesting because, like, obviously the Vrykolaka is, like, this really, like, feared creature that eats people's livers and kills them and turns other people into Vrykolakas and all this crazy stuff. But then I like that a lot of these accounts of them and this, like, family history of them that's been passed down is, like, these were, like, some friendly Vrykolakas that just, like, came back and they were, like, helping their family.
And then they died.
Yeah, but then they still burned them because they were Vrykolakas.
Maybe they were doing something. They had, like, a meeting every Saturday. They had a book club on Saturday. Or a shoemaker's club. All these shoemakers had a shoemaker club on Saturday.
It's where they exchange, like, leathers and stuff.
Yeah, that's why they hate shoemakers. Is that they all happen to... They just thought that Saturday worked for them. They can't do Monday through Tuesday. Sunday, they got to go to church. Let's do Saturday. Let's meet on Saturday.
Saturdays are for the Vrykolakas.
Yeah, Saturdays are for the Vrykolakas, the boys, and the shoemakers.
So another one of the individuals that Dorothy interviewed said, we would be afraid of Vrykolakas. I saw ones that they said was a Vrykolakas. In the homeland, they said that a man is a Vrykolakas when, after 3 years, they dig up his corpse whole. When the body has melted away and only bones are left, the relatives go and take the bones. They put them in a little box. They pour wine over them. The priest reads over them. They put them in the house of sleep.
Really trying to kill that liver, aren't they? Yeah. You eat liver, so we're going to give you a bunch of wine to kill the liver.
Right. And... yeah, it's literally just bones at this point. So it's like bones in a box. They pour wine over it. The priest reads over it. Then they put it in the house of sleep. They put on the box the name of the dead and the date. But some bodies do not melt away. And of these they say, he has become a Vrykolakas. In those years, we said that these had been cursed by their father, or that the priest had excommunicated them because they had married a relative or they had committed a crime. Then they said that this man will come out whole after he dies. Now, I don't believe these things, but then I did. And some people
I didn't believe them until I believed them.
And some people come out of the soil in 3 years. with flesh on, black, and half decayed. And I saw one, and how could I sleep after that? They had him in the yard of the church as an example to the people. And after 3 days, his relatives took him, and they had to recite many prayers and bury him. And again, after 3 years, to take him out. Of this, they would say that it is a Vrykolakas, and we would be afraid.
So if you're a slow rotter, you're also Vrykolakas?
Yeah,
even if you're very, very
you
dead.
a Vrykolakas.
You're not rotting fast enough for our liking, and you were a shoemaker.
They're like, this is a still living body.
It's like missing an arm, thoroughly rotted through, and they're like, "Yep, he's still alive." You know, he was a shoemaker in life, right? And he cared for his kids.
Well, and then the bad thing about this is, so she continues, such a thing would give rise to gossip and speculation about the man's life. Now, I think that these bodies would not disintegrate because of the kind of water in the soil. We feared the Vrykolakas because he would take us down into the grave. Sometimes they would say to us, he will take you. He will put his arms around you to keep you near him, to scare us when we were children. But as for me, I would not say such things to my children. And so basically this lady that Dorothy is interviewing, who's like a native of Greece but has immigrated to the United States, she's saying that, like, even when she was a child in, like, the early 1900s, they're still telling these stories to children, like, beware of the Vrykolakas.
Well, weren't you saying that they were still like being superstitious about this and going through the practices of dealing with Vrykolakas even in World War II?
Yeah, in the 1940s during the Great Famine. And, of course, like, very few Greek people, I think, still believe in this. But enough to where, like, there was accounts of families that were beheading, like, their loved ones' corpses so that they wouldn't become undead. It kind of begs the question of, like, is this just kind of another weird religious tradition? What are the Greeks really so scared of that they've pinned all of these bodies down in the grave, that they're dismembering these corpses? Were these Vrykolakas real? Do they still haunt us today? Or were they just stories that they would tell children to scare them?
Or was it a do this to properly bury your family?
Right.
And don't trust shoemakers.
Don't trust the shoemakers. But, yeah, I thought it was really interesting because it kind of, I think when we think of ancient Greece, we think about a little bit further back where people are talking about the gods and the goddesses, but we forget that.
Yeah, you're thinking ancient Greece, not old Greece.
Right, that this, like, because it's all, you know, ancient is such,
it's
like, it's the only good term to use. Like, I literally looked up ancient synonyms to try and find something else to use, and there's just no other good descriptor for this time period. There's just not. But at the same time, like, when you say ancient, you could literally be talking about, like, a couple hundred years ago, or you could be talking about, like, thousands of years ago, or you could be talking about millions of years ago.
Yeah, you could be talking prehistory, early history, or, like, ancient modern history. Like, yeah, that's interesting. How did you find out about this? Because you're like, not a lot of people know about this. Where you're just like, I want to find out about vampires. What's the origin of vampires?
It was actually, I was listening to a science podcast it was a science, like, historian who was talking about a certain disease, but for some reason she was, like, researching the Vrykolakas because she thought that maybe, like, people thought the Vrykolakas was because of, like, this certain disease. And I went back to try and find the episode, and I could not find out which episode it was, like, because I have listened to, like, 100 episodes at this point, and I didn't remember the episode title, and I was not able to go through all of them.
That's, like, what I was saying earlier about some people thought that, like, vampires were, like, this disease or that disease caused certain things. I think consumption and, like, tuberculosis were some of them.
There was actually, when people first came over to the Americas, of course, there was, like, the colony, and it was essentially a lot of men at first that were just here, like, trying to, you know, build homesteads, and they were going to bring their wives over later. But I think it was the Spanish government decided that it would be better if they brought some women over.
Oh, the French in Louisiana, right? Something like
I think that's what it was.
Yes, the French in Louisiana brought these women over, and they're like, oh, they're vampires. Do you see those giant boxes they have that definitely don't have all of their clothes and worldly possessions?
And
they're
like,
definitely vampires.
Because they had been sick on this ship on, like, a months-long journey. And they were just, like, these sick girls, but then, they thought they were vampires. But
Yeah.
yeah, so I thought this was like an interesting topic because I had literally never heard of this before, and it's
Yeah, no, me neither. Thank you
it's
for sharing.
very uncommon. So yeah.
Cool. Thank you for listening. If you liked, please rate the podcast and share it with the weird people in your life. Follow us on Instagram at What About Weird Pod, where we often share pictures related to this episode. If you have any topic suggestions or personal weird stories, DM us or email us at whataboutweirdpod@gmail.com. And always remember
To ask about the weird.
bye for now.